Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Jones, and I serve as chair of the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to roll call to signify their presence in this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call or other electronic medium. Jim Kilmartin.
Present.
Jardine Coleman.
Here.
Nicole Eitzen. Not on yet. Okay. John Fleeker.
Here.
James Godby. Is Jim on?
He is on. He's currently muted right now.
Okay. Chris Haben.
Here.
Marcy Lechtenberg.
Here.
Heidi Vella.
Here.
And I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Mary. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting, as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On February 16th, 2024, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who have requested notice of such meetings. The notice is also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been uploaded to the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check it before we got started. There's no one on the line currently, but if I hear someone enter, I will let you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. The first item is the agenda approval. There was an agenda submitted in the packet of materials that David emailed to us. And if there aren't any questions or changes, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Jardine. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Jim. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. The next item of business is reviewing the minutes from the previous meeting on February 9th. And if there aren't any comments or changes, I'll take a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Jim. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Marcy. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Great. The next item on the agenda is the executive director's report. Dave?
Thank you, Mary. I'll go ahead and start with some agency operations. First, the BSRB staff is preparing for an increase in applicants as a lot of students are getting ready to graduate from their programs. So we're excited for those individuals. Another step we're taking concerning upcoming graduations is that the assistant director and I, Leslie Allen, we have been providing presentations to a lot of schools that oversee the subject matter for the professions we regulate. And we've done a lot of these meetings in person and other ones by Zoom. But we've been able to talk to them about the licensure process and try to answer their questions up front, clarify that process for them, give them some information about their expectations as a professional in terms of unprofessional conduct and other requirements. And also provide some information about the resources on the BSRB website. And those presentations have been very well received. Another item in terms of outreach, I was recently invited to speak to a group, the Governor's Behavioral Health Center for Excellence in Wichita. and was able to provide information remotely to members of that group. And that was a presentation that was very, very well received. I provided information in terms of the work of the advisory committees and the board, in terms of requesting statutory changes and other regulatory changes to address things like workforce, while also making sure the public protection of the mission of the board is being served. And I can fairly say the members of that committee wanted to communicate back to the advisory committees and the board. They are very appreciative of all those actions that have been taken recently and the ones that are also in development. I could tell based on my comments that they had maybe had some conversations about some of those topics, and they thought it was very helpful. The board was, listening to the comments and the feedback from individuals and the communities and employers, and taking those things to heart as we look to update and modernize our requirements for licensure and make sure that our policies are sound. So really good presentation to that group, and they wanted me to communicate the positive feedback to all of you as well. Another item I thought I'd make you aware of, we are currently in the process of making some real big structural changes to how we store records for the BSRB. We have been in the process of trying to get away from paper records and move more to electronic records for the agency, and that has been a challenging undertaking, but we're making progress in that. Yesterday, we were able to essentially get rid of about 20 large file cabinets, which previously held a lot of our paper records. That has not been an easy endeavor, but we were able to get an approval from the Historical Society to shorten our document retention schedule. And then our staff members did a lot of work going through a lot of the old licensure files. And we're also going through some of our old disciplinary records as well, and looking to see what is appropriate to be transferred over. And the next step will be, we have some space here in the office that we're currently using for storage for records. We're hoping to open that up and give our staff members a little bit more space to be able to do their work effectively. But then our next step will be to start scanning a lot of our existing records, making sure we have a good policy in place for that, and then get an approval to have that be our primary way of storing that information. And then if we can do that, we can start looking at having staff members work a little bit more remotely. And should there ever be an issue in terms of functionality for the state, we've taken some actions in terms of making sure we have a good continuity of operations plan, but having more resources available electronically like that will be another step forward in that realm as well. But it does look quite a bit different to me in terms of our physical space here in the office, and really wanted to thank all the staff members for their work on that front. Another item that we're also moving forward on, we are going to be changing the website for the BSRB. That will probably launch here in about a month or so. Granicus is providing new websites to a lot of the state agencies, and we are moving our existing website under the Granicus platform. This should not change a lot of the functionality of the website in terms of the resources we offer or where people can find information. And also do want to stress our website address is not changing. We'll be able to keep that, so people can still go to the same place. It'll just look a little bit different here in about a month or so. One of the advantages is it should be more friendly to individuals on mobile devices to be able to find certain information. And it should provide us also some more functionality in terms of being able to create new forms. So we're trying to explore that, see if that will help us move to sort of an electronic application or other functionalities like that. But we've been working with the Granicus team. We've been doing internal trainings for our staff members to make sure that we have good tools for when that goes live. And that should happen here probably the first week in May. Moving to some updates from the past board meeting. The board last met on March 11th, 2024. Some of the items I'll just highlight for you on the advisory committee. We are getting close to finalizing an agreement with a company called CE Broker. That is a company that partners with licensing boards for different states. They've already reached an agreement with the Board of Nursing and Board of Healing Arts here in Kansas. And it's an optional service for licensees to be able to have an account with CE Broker and then upload their documentation of completion of continuing education, so that if they are pulled for audit, that information is all right there for the board to check, and then it should help us out with the audit process. Should be a help for licensees in terms of not having to mail or get that information to the BSRB to check during the audit process, and it should speed up the time frame for that as well. So like I said, we're in the final stages. We've been working on a master service agreement and also a data sharing agreement to make sure we have all the technical language correct. But I think we're very close to getting that all resolved. Another conversation item the board discussed at the March 11th meeting was background checks for licensees. The board did receive statutory authority for the option to require background checks as a condition of licensure back in 2016, but the board has not made that a mandatory requirement as a condition of licensure. However, we have joined some multi-state compacts recently, and some of the terms for those compacts is to require background checks as a condition of licensure for individuals wishing to practice under the compact. So at least for those individuals, for the SIPAC compact for psychology, the professional counseling compact, which is in the process of becoming functional, and then the social work compact, if that bill is signed into law by the governor, that would also require individuals under the compact to have a background check through the BSRB. And so the larger conversation for the board has been, does the board want to go ahead and make a background check a requirement for all levels of licensure in all professions, or to wait right now and move forward on the ones that are required to do so through the multi-state compacts. So the board is going to have some more discussion on that at the next board meeting in May. Additionally, at the board meeting in March, the board received a presentation by a group called Acela. That is a vendor for state licensing systems. Last year, there was a bill that passed the legislature to create a unified license verification portal for the licensing agencies in Kansas, kind of a one-stop shop, so that someone could go to that website, type in someone's name, and then they could see if they're licensed in Kansas, whether it's under the BSRB or the Board of Healing Arts or the other regulatory boards. And so as part of that bill passing, the state set up a contract with an in-state or a vendor for state agencies, so that if agencies wanted to switch their licensing systems to Acela, they could do that. And so about 5 or 6 have already made that decision to switch. We've been kind of tracking that information to follow it, but they're getting to the point now to where they're looking to put more agencies on that list who would be switching over. And so, like I said, Acela presented information to the board. The board will have some more discussion at the next board meeting in terms of if that would be a good solution for the BSRB to change licensing vendors. Another item the board talked about and passed was a delegation motion for staff. This has to do with a handful of applicants that attended school many years in the past, and there's a requirement for individuals, for certain individuals, they would need a reference from their practicum supervisor. And for some of those individuals, based on how long ago they received their education, the practicum supervisor may be deceased or may not be available, and the school can't locate that individual. So in the past, when this has occurred, we've held those applications and had the board review them to make the decision on this. And the board has been approving those individuals for those circumstances and made the delegation motion for staff of the BSRB to be able to go ahead and move those individuals forward without it having to be held and decided by the board. So we're able to kind of move forward a little bit more quickly on some of those individuals that fall into that situation. Also, the board began a discussion on jurisprudence examinations, and that's on the agenda for the advisory committee to discuss as well. The board had a short conversation and then asked the advisory committees to discuss that topic and provide feedback. And then the last item I want to highlight from the board meeting is that once a year, the board seeks to have an all-day planning meeting. And this year, that all-day planning meeting is being held in person. The date for the meeting will be Monday, September 30th, 2024. We're working out the logistics on that. We don't have a lot of the details confirmed just yet, but we're hoping maybe to have that meeting in Lawrence, Kansas. A couple of years ago, we had the meeting in Kansas City. Last year, we had it in Wichita. So we're trying to keep this as a meeting that does move around the state. But I think based on population centers and also the location of a lot of the board members, Lawrence would be a good location for the meeting this year. So working on the logistics for that. Shifting now to some legislative updates. Every spring, the legislature does meet in Kansas and considers different bills. They also consider the budget for the state of Kansas. As part of that process, both the House and the Senate review every state agency's budget separately. So this year, especially earlier in the year, I presented information to the House and Senate committees on the budget for the BSRB. Just as a quick reminder, we don't receive any money directly from the state for operations. Our operational funding comes from the fees that we charge for individuals who are licensed. And by law, we contribute 10% of all revenue that we receive to the state general fund to help fund other state operations. But what the legislature does is review, and they provide feedback in terms of a limitation on how much we can spend every year. and we submit a requested limit in terms of our yearly expenditures. The governor makes recommendations on this amount, and then the House and the Senate provide further feedback. And as part of that process, they can also provide input and ask for additional information or put provisos on things the BSRB would be required to do or would be prohibited from doing. So this year, when it went before the Senate committee, we provided some updates to the Senate. They didn't have any recommended changes on the amount for the BSRB. They also had noted that the BSRB fee fund, which is our operating fund for the agency, back in the 2010s, from a period of at least 2016 to 2019, the balance had been growing. But in 2019, the board put in some pretty aggressive fee decreases, reducing application fees and renewal fees by $50 each for almost all the professions. And that was done by design to create a deficit for the agency in future years to draw down the balance in the BSRB fee fund. And since 2019, the balance in the fund has gone down from about 2.3 million down to about 1.9 million today. So the Senate was very complimentary of the board taking action to address that issue. And ultimately, if the fund balance drops to a low enough spot, the board would need to consider possible fee increases to stabilize that amount. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're still in a period of deficit, and the balance should go down in future years, but that's where we're at right now. The Senate was very complimentary of that. The House committee reviewed that information for the House. They requested the board put together a report on other possible ways that the board could consider fee decreases. So the board did hold a special board meeting in February to examine this topic, provide comments and feedback, and go over some information. When those fee decreases were put in place back in 2019, there was not a fee decrease for the behavior analyst profession. So at the meeting in February, the board did make a recommendation to lower renewal fees for behavior analysts and also assistant behavior analysts by $50, which is consistent with the fee decreases for the other professions back in 2019. Additionally, we as an agency attempted to collect information on licensure fees in other states for all the 7 professions. And while we were able to collect some of that information given the short time period, we weren't able to do that for all the professions. So we did provide information on licensed psychology that showed that our fees were very positive in terms of comparisons to other states. And we asked the board, we'd be happy to collect the information for the other professions, but we need some additional time. So what the board ultimately recommended and put together in a report was the plan to continue to review the fund balance of the BSRB fee fund, to collect additional information on fund amount of licensure fees in other states, and then to consider additional changes possibly at the July board meeting or the September board meeting when the board puts together a budget for the next year. Also, the board did note there were a number of other factors which could further cause fee decreases or fee fund balance to go down, such as last year the board did lower some additional fees for individuals with temporary licenses. The board also absorbed the cost of 2 new licensing specialist positions that were approved with the passage of Senate Bill 131 last year. Additionally, we were looking at multi-state compacts the board has recently joined, and the social work compact was up before the legislature this year. There was uncertainty whether that compact would balance revenues or whether it would lead to further decreases in terms of revenue for the agency. And so the board will be reviewing that all in the fall. But we did provide that report back to the House committee, and there were no further changes concerning our expenditures or anything with the fund balance this year. When the bill was going before the House and the Senate, there was temporarily sort of an unusual and odd proviso that was added by the House Appropriations Committee. The language for that proviso would have prohibited the BSRB from enforcing our in-residence requirement for individuals that came from non-accredited schools for the social work profession. And I was able to follow up with leadership of House Appropriations after that amendment was made, and also to the maker of the motion as well. And I think there was a fair amount of confusion about one of our regulatory changes that we're trying to put through right now. But I was able to share information and let the members of the committee sort of help to understand that topic a little bit better. And through those conversations, I'm happy to report that when the bill was worked by the House on the floor, The maker of that motion had a second motion to remove that proviso language from the BSRB budget. And so was very happy to have good communication with those legislative leaders and make sure that everybody understood the issues a little bit better. And so really happy that they took that action to remove that from the budget. So ultimately, the House and the Senate have passed a budget bill that has been forwarded to the governor for consideration, and we're just waiting to see the action the governor is going to take on the budget bill right now. In terms of some other updates for some of the bills relevant to the BSRB, I did mention the social work compacts. That was House Bill 2484. And the BSRB, the board, has been one of the biggest proponents of that bill. We were asked by representatives of NASW Kansas to be supportive of the compact at the January board meeting, and the board did elect to be supporters of the compact. When it went before the House committee and the Senate committee, I provided proponent information in favor of the compact and expressed that the board did view some really positive things from that social work compact. We did say that we would like the compact to be set up appropriately when it's going through that legislative process, but we always said that we were in favor of the compact. And what this compact would do is it would allow states the ability to charge a multi-state or to create multi-state licenses. So right now, if you want to practice in a different state, you would need to get a license in that state. And what this has meant is that for social workers wishing to practice in a lot of states, they needed to get a separate license in every state that they wanted to practice in. Under this compact, you would instead be able to either keep your existing license, which would be regarded as a single state license, just letting you practice in Kansas, or you could get a multi-state license from your state, which would not only allow you to practice in Kansas, but all other compact states once the compact is live. So we did bring information to the committees, and the board did review this information as well. One of the issues with this is while this compact will provide better continuity of care in terms of social workers being able to provide services to individuals here in the state, and then also their clients when their clients briefly go out of state, let's say on vacation, or if they move out of state. One of the challenges is that a lot of our licensees currently do live outside of Kansas. And so what this model would do is it would essentially replace traditional licensure for those people. So instead of them continuing to get a license in Kansas, they could get a multi-state license in the state where they live and would likely just let their Kansas license no longer renew any longer. It would just expire. And so losing that revenue from the out-of-state licensees would be a challenge for the board. Social work is the largest profession in terms of numbers that we oversee. And like I said, 22% of our licensees live out of state. So if no action was taken, the revenue total we provided to the Division of Budget was that over a 2-year license period, if we lost all those out-of-state licensees, it would create a deficit of $150,000 every 2 years. So the way that the compact allows states to mitigate this is to charge a higher amount for a multi-state license. And so the original draft of the bill would have provided the BSRB some flexibility. It would have set a cap for each of the specific fees for the BSRB, and then the board could have had discussion on those amounts to see what the appropriate amount should be for those different levels of licensure. Unfortunately, when it went through the legislative process, they removed that language and instead replaced it with a $25 privilege fee, which doesn't really match this type of compact. And it really does tie the hands of the board because it's set up as a $25 cap, but based on the actual loss of revenue for individuals, we don't think that amount is likely to cover the expected loss of revenue to the BSRB. And to just sort of back up that statement, we did pull numbers from the Board of Nursing. Nursing is the only other profession that has a multi-state compact with a multi-state license. And based on the numbers of that compact, if you look over the first 4 years of the implementation of the nursing compact, only about 20% of those licensees that were eligible for the compact did actually choose to switch to the multi-state compact. But for social work, it's not the same profession. We did pull our social workers here in the state and sent out a survey to all 8,288 individual social workers licensed by the BSRB. And we asked them, if we switched from a single state to a multi-state, would you be interested in switching to the multi-state license? And so based on the percentages of individuals wishing to switch from a single state to a multi-state, of course, we dropped all the individuals that live out of state because they wouldn't be eligible for that. But if you apply the percentages to individuals who would still be living in the state of Kansas as social workers, essentially that $25 cap, if the board wanted to go to the max, would only make up about $100,000. So we would still be short of about $50,000 every 2 years. So we did express that to the committees when it went before the committees. I think there might have been some misinformation that was provided by certain other individuals at those hearings. We tried to provide good information to them and let the legislative members know. We did request an amendment to have the amount not be a $25 cap, but to be a $35 cap. And so based on our numbers, that would at least present sort of a break-even point for the BSRB. That amendment went to the committee. It went to a 4-4 vote, and ultimately the chair determined that the amendment did not pass. So unfortunately, that did not get put onto the bill. So the $25 amount is what is currently on the bill, and the bill has been sent to the governor for consideration. So I think if the governor does sign it into law, which I fully expect she will, then it will be an issue that we'll have to kind of look at for the future to see how we can resolve that issue. But so those are some of the technicalities and some of the logistics of what we've been working on. Unfortunate that we weren't able to have the version of the bill that would be, the most appropriately set up, in my opinion, that went to the governor's office. But the BSRB really is still very happy about the social work compact getting to the governor's office. We do think this will help out our licensees and provide better services to the people that live here in Kansas. So we are really excited about that and looking forward to that in the future. So in terms of the time frame, though, hard to know when the compact will be effective. I do believe enough states will pass the compact this spring that the compact commission can start meeting. And then once that happens, they can start determining the rules for the compact and start to work on a data system so that the public can be aware who all has a multi-state license. And so, so that will take some additional time, but maybe in a year, potentially, maybe the compact can be effective then. But that's just kind of best guess. We've had a number of compacts go through for other professions. And I think if we can learn from some of the work of the other compacts, perhaps that number might be a little bit less, but we'll have to wait and see. And I realize you're not social workers, and so you may be wondering why I went into this much detail for your committee. The thing is there has been conversation about a multi-state compact for marriage and family therapy. I think there is some interest from a lot of states for that. And so I just kind of wanted to prepare you for these types of conversations. One of the biggest conversations is when these compacts are originally drafted, there are choices in terms of the model for how these compacts can be set up. And there are pros and cons, and there are things that need to be factored in. But I think in the past, some of the emphasis has been, well, let's just create the compact and let's just make sure to get it into law, and then we can work out the details later. And I think that's a messy solution. So as much as possible, I encourage good conversation proactively so we can put something in the right way. So just kind of wanted to share all this with you and hope that if there is one for the marriage and family therapy, perhaps we can have a voice in that conversation in terms of setting up that compact. So with that, the only other thing that I will mention is in terms of legislative items, we are in the process of having some regulations almost become effective. These have been going through the process for quite some time. We're really excited about some of these changes. This should help a lot of individuals who currently cannot meet the requirements for licensure better meet those requirements. That process can take a long time for the regulations to go through, but we've been able to get them approved by the Department of Administration, the Attorney General's office. They were held open for 60 days for public comment. We had a public meeting here at the board office for additional comment. The next step is for the board to vote, take a roll call vote to adopt the regulations, and that will be at the opportunity for the board to do that will be at the next board meeting on May 13th. And then if the board does vote to implement those regulations, then we would need to publish those in the Kansas Register. I think the earliest we could do that is probably May 23rd. And then 15 days after that, then they would become effective. So in the meanwhile, if we do approach that point to where we're about to publish, we will send a message out to all licensees with more details. And for the last few months, we have had information on our website about those proposed changes to regulation. And we went in front of a joint committee for the legislature as well and shared information on those positive changes. But we've talked to you about some of those in the past, but I just kind of want to give you an update on the time frame. We are getting very close to those actually becoming effective. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dave. As always, there's a lot of information presented. Are there questions or comments from the advisory committee panel members?
I had a question. Yesterday in a meeting, someone brought up Senate Bill 12, and I wondered if you could give us any information about that with the bill around doctors providing care to trans youth. And did you feel like that is that staying in the medical domain for now? And is that impacting the BSRB, the professions licensed under the BSRB at all yet?
So I'm looking up that bill. So Senate Bill 12, it does involve a medical topic, but I think maybe you might be referencing a different bill. But Senate Bill 12, that is a bill that would enact the Kansas Child Mutilation Prevention Act.
Mhm.
Lines performing gender reassignment surgery or prescription of hormone replacement therapy on certain persons or providing grounds. That's just kind of the description the legislature
Mhm.
added to the bill. That bill was introduced last year, and the last action on Senate Bill 12 is just that it was referred to the Senate Committee on Public Health and Welfare and the Committee on the Judiciary, which is interesting. You usually don't have something assigned to two committees at once, but I
Okay.
think the bill that really has been discussed on the topic that you mentioned, it seems like that is Senate Bill 332. And that bill has been passed by both the House and the Senate. Actually, let me double check the number on that bill. There is a bill that has been sent to the House and the Senate that would involve the transgender topic that you were talking about. And I think the issue for that is the topic is largely focused on healthcare providers, and I think the language in that bill does talk about more individuals licensed by the Board of Healing Arts.
Okay.
But it's a little tricky right now because the bill has not been signed into law. It's been sent to the governor for review. And we're kind of waiting to see what the governor will do concerning that bill. I think I've heard some people discuss that perhaps the governor will veto that bill. If the governor does veto the bill, it would be sent back to the legislature for consideration. And I believe the original margins by which it passed in the House and the Senate were not quite the 2/3 that would be necessary to overturn a veto. Now it would be a totally separate vote. But that's, and I apologize, I can't seem to find the number for the bill that I'm thinking about, but I think there is another bill that has recently been sent
Okay.
that would deal with that topic.
Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah. One of our credentialing specialists asked about that, and I was like, I have not heard that, but I have a meeting and I'll ask about it. So, okay.
Thank you, Jordine. Are there any other questions? There's definitely been a lot going on this legislative session, as always, and just so that you're aware, David has a nice review and synopsis of bills that are pertinent to the BSRB to the board pretty much weekly at this point, and so it definitely tries to keep us informed of what's going on. Other questions? Okay, the next item is the education requirements. I don't know if Leslie, if you want to kick us off on this, or Dave, if you want to get us refreshed and reoriented into the educational requirements discussion.
Sure, I'll start it, and then Leslie, if you want to kind of highlight some of the topics, but basically, sort of in a big picture sense, the way that licensure is set up is that there are statutory requirements for licensure, and those are passed in bill form into law, and then the agency is able to sort of within the statutory authority outline the nuts and bolts of the licensure process. And so for licensure, essentially every profession has a regulation that outlines the educational requirements for licensure, and largely what those education regulations outline is whether there is a national accrediting body recognized for certain educational programs, and then whether the agency, the state will allow licensure for individuals who receive their education from non-accredited programs. And in Kansas, we have a flexible system, in my opinion, compared to some of the others. Some of the others, at least for some of the professions, they really do call for people to be from accredited programs. But for Kansas, the language in our regulations for marriage and family therapy would essentially say that you would need to come from a national accredited program or meet the alternate requirements and the regulation. And for your profession, that is KAR 102-5-3. And one thing that we have talked about with the board, and the board has asked each of the advisory committees to do, is to review the educational regulations for their profession. Because what some of these regulations include is program level requirements. And so it would say that if you came from a non-accredited program, then the program you did come from would need to meet each of these requirements. Also, it might say that there's a certain amount of specific coursework that would need to be required. And sometimes it identifies even a certain number of hours for each of those courses. And so the board has asked each of the advisory committees to review the regulation with educational requirements for licensure for their profession and to determine if the language is still good, or if there's updated terminology that needs to be provided, or if there may be some of these items that are requirements for licensure for non-accredited applicants that maybe would be helpful for them to have, but not necessary for their program to have. And the reason I phrase it like that is because, well, I'll go ahead and share sort of a part of that regulation with you so you can kind of see the language for that. And the version that I sent out and we have posted on the website of KAR 102-5-3 is you can see sort of the stamps of approval at the bottom for the Department of Administration and the Attorney General's office. This is the version of the regulation that is going through the process of being changed. So I wanted you to kind of see, based on the previous discussion and the previous changes the board has requested, this is how it would appear after those changes would be effective. But the language here that talks about individuals coming from certain programs, let's say D on page 2, each marriage and family therapy program that is not accredited by the Commission on Accreditation for Marriage and Family Therapy Education shall meet all of these conditions. And then you have a number of requirements here. And based on how that wording is phrased, it essentially puts the board into a position to say, you know, D talks about if someone does not come from an accredited program, the program they came from would have to meet all of those conditions. And so if someone attended a program and the items were not true for all of those requirements, then the board would be asked to deny the license for that person. And so that's why when I say it may be helpful, but is it necessary? That's kind of the lens to take on reviewing some of these requirements, because if any of these requirements are not met, then the board would be asked to essentially deny the license application for that person. So at the last meeting, we started a little bit of a discussion about the different items in this regulation and possible items for change. But there were a couple of good items that were brought out and that were highlighted in the minutes from the last meeting. One of the items I think that Leslie mentioned had to do with the requirement of 3 hours in psychopathology. And some of the programs, it sounds like, only require about 2.7 hours based on the way that they have their credits. So if applicants are deficient, they must take another psychopathology course to meet the requirements for licensure. Some of the previous items individuals have struggled with have to do with the current definition of in residence in terms of individuals needing to be physically present at the school. However, the proposed change to that regulation would open it up. Two of the things that it would change: one, right now, the in-residence requirement is for individuals, whether they came from an accredited program or a non-accredited program. The new language would make it clear that would only apply to individuals from non-accredited programs. The other thing is that the definition would change, so they wouldn't need to be physically present at the school. That would be one of two methods of meeting the in-residence requirement. You could either be physically present at the school, or you could be in face-to-face contact with core faculty members by synchronous video conferencing, which does open up the doorway for some of the online programs to meet that. There was an issue in the past in terms of individuals meeting the requirement of the 3,000 hours as part of a practicum. But I think Leslie shared last meeting that some of that was changed with the enactment of the bill last year, 2023, Senate Bill 131, that those hours can be made up. So that has largely helped address that issue. There is some language that states that programs must require a certain amount of hours in certain areas. And I think there may have been situations to where the person actually took the hours in those areas, but the program maybe didn't require it to be in those areas. And so that may be sort of a technical issue with the language of the regulation. The way it's phrased right now is that the person's program would either have to be accredited by the national accrediting body or meet the following requirements. So it kind of puts the requirements on the programs. So, but that may be sort of a technical issue in terms of whether it's a program requirement or whether it is just something the person would need to complete. And those are sort of the items that I recall being highlighted from the last meeting. But I think just the language of some of these items would be helpful for the advisory committee to review, just to kind of provide some thoughts and feedback to see if these items are all necessary for individuals to complete if they are part of an educational coursework for non-accredited programs. So Leslie, are there any items that I didn't cover that you think would also be helpful for the advisory committee to keep in mind when they go through this exercise?
No, I think you covered everything.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say, so the 3-hour psychopathology course, that is an issue for people who come from a COA MFTE accredited program that uses quarter hours. So they still have to take another psychopathology class.
Okay, just to sort of help guide the discussion, because some of these things were already addressed, Dave, as you were talking about, they're like in that final stage. This issue of the psychopathology course is probably the most critical, are you saying, at this point, based on some of the work we've already done?
I think so, yes.
I just want to make sure I follow all the updates, because some of them were already sort of made
Right.
changes and we're waiting.
Right.
So
It happens fairly often.
So when you're seeing the average at 2.77 or something like that, I mean, that's a risky credit hour in my mind. Do you have a recommendation that we would look at 2 credit hours or?
Well, let me look at, so let me go back to the other regulations for the definition of quarter hours.
Okay.
Can I jump in
Yes.
As an application reviewer? My suggestion would be to just remove the hours requirements, that people just have taken a course, period.
Oh.
Because this also comes up with people who take quarters versus semesters or whatever. That if they've taken a course in it, we're not looking in depth at what did the course cover with regard to XYZ, like did they cover the whole DSM? Did they cover part of the DSM? If they took the course in psychopathology, we would accept the course in psychopathology if the course description matches what we deem to be an appropriate psychopathology course. The number of hours feels like it's maybe too nitpicky, but that's just my opinion.
No, thank you for that, because I mean, you look at these more frequently than anyone at this point, I think.
Yeah, so so Georgine, do you think if their psychopathology is only 1 credit hour, do you think that's enough?
I think it depends on what the class is about, but the way that I read the regulations, I'm comparing the description of the course to what it says in our regulation. And if it matches, then that means that the course covered what was sufficient. And then I just document how many hours it translates to. So I mean, that's a good point, that it could be a 1 credit hour course, but it doesn't. I think that the people who end up going to a school that does quarters we're sort of discriminating against programs that use quarters, because those applicants are always at a deficit. unless they take 2 courses of something that requires 3 hours, they're always going to be at a deficit.
So there's the other option would be to say 3 semester credit hours or 4 quarter hours, and that equals 2.7 semester hours. I mean, it would be. But if they do 3 credit hour courses, then they're only 2. So
Mhm.
it really does. They do
Does-
have to have an extra course.
Does Friends is on quarters?
No,
No. Are any of our programs in the state on quarters?
no, ours are all semesters.
Mm.
But the I don't know if it's Capella or Walden. One of those two, maybe both, are quarter hours and they're accredited by Comfati.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then your suggestion was to just acknowledge whatever the minimum quarter requirement already is for co-MP, just use that.
Yeah.
That makes sense too.
I appreciate Jardine's comments because it's what's the purpose? I mean, do we know they could be spending 5 hours in a psychopathology class? Do we know that it's directed to the DSM? Does it? And so I think that if we had something about the intent or the purpose.
And you can, Mary, you said 2 semester hours, which would cover both. And that's what LPCs have. They have to have 2 in each category, but they have to have multiple classes in certain areas but each class has to be at least 2 semester hours, which would cover the 4 quarter credits too.
I'm gonna add a little bit to this discussion too, in terms of the statutory requirements compared to the regulations.
Okay.
So what we're looking at in terms of the psychopathology requirement really goes towards the individuals wanting to get the clinical level of licensure.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a statute that also addresses that issue too. It's KSA 65-6404. And under that item, it looks like it's B1 large B. The person must have completed 15 credit hours as part or in addition to the requirements under a different section supporting diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders with the use of the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual through identifiable study in the following content areas: psychopathology, diagnostic assessment, interdisciplinary referral and collaboration, treatment approaches, and professional ethics. So it looks like that's 5 categories for 15 hours. So I think it's sort of at least could be implied that we would be looking for 3 hours in each of those 5. Mm-hmm. But it really just says 15 combined credit hours in those 5 categories. But it looks like the regulation has language that's a little bit different, where it really does specify that 3 hours must be in the psychopathology, and then the remaining 12 hours or their academic equivalent shall consist in, I believe, the other categories that are referenced there in the statute. So that is a little bit different in terms of what the statute requires versus the regulation. So I guess maybe another way to cover it would just be to remove the specific reference that it would have to be 3 hours for that. And as long as the 15 were covered by those 5 categories, that would match the statute.
I will say that that is one of the things that was made uniform, requiring a specific course in psychopathology that's discrete, where the others can be integrated coursework among all the professions. So I think it should be, to keep it social work, LPC, LMLPs, they all have to have a specific discrete psychopathology course. So there should be some type of discrete requirement.
But if we kept that requirement, but remove the hours requirement, that still would match the statutory language.
Mm-hmm.
Based on how I'm reading that too, yeah, because the statute just says 15 hours that must hit all of these categories.
Yes.
But the regulation says specifically 3 of the hours have to be in this category and the remaining 12 the rest. So
Right. And the other professions, LPCs, their psychopathology is 2, and then the rest are 3. So.
But they will all be
Something we
discussing
can-
this. I
Yeah.
similarly,
Exactly.
yeah. I mean, I think the clean way is to remove the hours as Jardine's recommending, because you still have to statutorily cover the coursework. And in my mind, I mean, you never know, but it'd be hard, I think, for any educational university to have a 1-hour psychopathology class. I think that would be a difficult class, but you never know what pops up in the world.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know what the other committee members.
I don't know if my concern makes any, I'm sorry, Mary, I didn't raise my hand.
No, please go ahead. No, you don't have to. Please. Free form, Chris.
I'm sorry if this sounds out of turn. I just, when I came here 20 years ago, Missouri was in a very different place where people couldn't get reimbursed because they weren't authorized to diagnose. And it took a lot of work to justify the training that we had, although we had in our program exceptional amount of training in the DSM, there's a lot of arguments that people weren't qualified to diagnose, therefore they're not eligible for reimbursement by third-party vendors. Now, maybe given where other statutes and regulations are, that's not a concern. My only hesitancy about not having that 3-hour expectation is I worry that on some level, and I feel like I'm worried about something that's highly unlikely, but I wouldn't want to open a door that would allow anything that would suggest that we're not adequately prepared to use the DSM-5 TR adequately and therefore not eligible for reimbursement it's my only worry based on previous experiences. And again, I might be whistling in the wind, but that's just something that comes to mind.
Well, it's not that far off, right? There was not
Right.
that long ago,
Right.
that lawsuit in Texas that was
Right.
doing very
Yes.
similar types things. So it's not, I don't know that it's so much of a worry. We hope we've come a long way, but I definitely can hear your point there.
And Chris, I want to thank you for that comment too. You know, my lens on some of these is more from a technical standpoint, kind of looking at, will this fit with the statute versus the regulation? And you all have much more history in terms of these professions and the importance of these specific courses. And so, and also knowing the history with that. So I appreciate you bringing that forward too.
So I think we're talking about really the 2 options at hand, or somewhere in between, is moving it to a 2-hour, which would still be an effective way to meet the statutory language, or removing the hours. Either way, it is covered in the statutory language to say we have to have this coursework. To the point that was just brought up, you know, would we have to defend that at some level? And would removing an hours requirement altogether somehow diminish that argument?
I mean, could somebody say a 1-hour course in the DSM would mean that you're not adequately training a person? I don't know.
How large of a hardship is it for people to take, like if they have 2.75 to take that extra quarter?
They can't. They have to take a whole class, a 3-hour course or a 2.7, another 2.7. And it's also, so they couldn't go back and take the same course from their program where it would be less expensive. They would have to get it somewhere else.
Okay. So instead of changing it to 2, could we change it to 2.7? Or is that too complicated?
I think if you said either 2 semester hours or 3 semester hours or 2.7 credit hours would be, the quarter credits would be. I don't know.
And Leslie, based on your interactions with D of A in terms of the language that they like.
Mhm.
Would it be possible to say at least, 2 or at least 2.7, whatever the number would be? That way it would cover. I wouldn't want to just set it at 2 if it's going to create an issue.
Yeah, and at least makes sense, right? Using that language. It's a good point, David.
And then you could
Yeah.
replace the remaining 12 hours. It could just be the remaining hours that would provide some flexibility there too.
And that would be in line with what LPC is recommending, is that correct?
They have 2-hour courses, yes.
They
They
have 2 hour.
require 2 semester hours in each thing.
But for them, it's already in their regulations that way. Is that
Yeah,
right?
all their coursework's that way.
So it would say 2 semester hours or 2 point whatever credit hours.
If you were changing
Or,
it to
yeah,
2
quarters.
semester hours, I would just leave it at 2 semester hours. We have in our regulations how to convert semester credit to semester hours. So then if someone took the 2.7 or the 4 quarter credit hours, it would equal 2.7, so they would be fine. So if you just put 2 semester credits, it would be fine.
I'm fine with that recommendation.
Yeah, I feel like, okay, so being out here doing therapy all day long, the demand is so high right now, that making people who are going to COAMF accredited schools do more work and possibly postpone helping treatment, that just feels so, like so dumb for the whole system here, because we just need more great therapists out here doing work.
Well, and that's the thing. If their program's accredited, we don't even care if they offer a 1 credit hour psychopathology course. Now, I don't think you can get accredited with a 1 credit hour psychopathology course, but if you go to a COAMF program, you bypass all the extra stuff. It's for the people who don't go to an accredited program. Then we dig deep into the nitty gritty of how many hours of this or that did you have? Does it meet the standard of accreditation? And if it does, then we say, okay, then you can have a license.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like in a way we're holding people who are not going to accredited schools to a higher standard, because the standard is 3 and for COAMF it's not.
No, so 2 different issues. When you go to an accredited program, then you can get your LMFT and we don't look at the coursework. However, when you go to get your LCMFT, you have to have had 3 hours in psychopathology. So if you only had 2.7 and you went to a COMFT school, you have to take another course to get your clinical license.
I see. Okay. I didn't understand that before.
I didn't either.
If we think the language of at least 2 semester hours or at least 2 hours in one way or another meets that, then that would be the recommendation on my end that we do. Because we certainly, if someone's at the point where they've had 2 years at least 2 years postgraduate and are ready for their LCMFT, it does seem silly that they would go back and have to take coursework after all that postgraduate
Agree.
clinical experience.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with
Worse
that.
than taking the test again.
Right, maybe. Okay, so our recommendation then, did I
2
hear that?
semester credit hours. Okay.
Just so making sure that I track, Leslie, are there other issues you really want us to dive into on the language in this regulation?
No,
Just-
unless we look at, I mean, you don't have a lot of program requirements like other professions, which is nice when you're reviewing it. But the one thing would be what Dave said, that it says the program has to require at least 9 semester credit hours in this area, 9 in this area. I,
Do you have a language recommendation for that? It just says coursework must cover, or I'm trying to, what page is that on? Sorry.
page 2.
Go ahead and share my screen here with that.
That's okay.
Something
I
like
just
the
like to
applicant
follow.
should, like, must have completed something like that
Mhm.
versus the program required it.
Yeah, this is the section here that talks about section D on page.
I think it's 2. Yeah.
So each marriage and family therapy program that is not accredited by the Commission on Accreditation for Marriage and Family Therapy Education shall meet all the following conditions.
And we have not updated the 300 hours from statute because it was already in the process of being changed. So
Okay.
that will change a little bit.
So if you had that first statement on D and then on 1, you start it with satisfactory completion. And then we'll change the hours on there.
So if you look at 2,
Yeah, that's what I was looking at there.
yeah.
So would it just be completion of 9 semester credit hours?
Let me look at the lead in again.
Yeah, because it says the program requires that each marriage and family therapy student successfully, you could have each marriage and family therapy student complete a minimum of 9.
So it starts that the program shall meet all of these conditions. The program. So yeah, I think we'd have to run it by, but I think maybe changing it to the student completed or something, to that effect. Maybe just strike the program requires that and just start with each marriage and family therapy student successfully complete these things.
I agree with that.
And then in 3 again. Because we just had a person who was reviewed and they had 2 hours in research instead of 3.
Would that same language of 2 semester hours or whatever that was, would that work for research as well?
Well, so in number 3, it says that the students successfully complete a minimum of 3 graduate semester credit hours in each of the following. So your ethics and your research are both 3-hour courses. And perhaps since they're individual courses, those should be 2 as well. I don't know what the committee thinks about that. Those are not the courses. I mean, they have to have an ethics course, but they don't have to have any specific number of hours for the clinical license. So we don't really look at those individually if they're from accredited programs. Maybe we should, obviously, accreditation standards don't include 3 semester credit hours for like the psychopathology, but I think it's a required course now, isn't it?
Actually, I was looking at the COA curriculum, if that's what you're asking about.
Yes.
And sorry, requires 3 credit hours of research,
Okay,
3 credit hours of ethics, and there was a 3 credit class, 3 credit hours on systemic relational assessment and mental health diagnosis and treatment.
so maybe it's the discrete yeah, because they would have other courses would address assessment in psychopathology, but it wouldn't be discrete, so it would kind of make the 3
Right, that's right.
work. Okay,
By the way, in the statute, KSA 65-6404, A2 large A, it does include the 3-hour requirement specifically in ethics in the statute.
oh,
So,
it does, okay.
not to say that it couldn't be changed, but it would require a change to law if you wanted to adjust that one.
I don't know that this is all that relevant, but personally, I feel like research is probably less important than psychopathology, but whatever.
Yeah, those would take a statute change, so.
Yeah, which is not our role here, but just feels a little bit crazy.
Right. Yeah, so I think that if we change the 3 categories to say that that each student completed it, then that should take care
Yeah.
of the quarter credits and stuff.
I think that makes sense to me.
And maybe we could take a look at this introductory language too. Because
Mhm.
it is really focused on what the program has and the program requires versus what the
Mhm.
completed. But
Mm-hmm.
but really, it is about what the individual has completed to see if that's sufficient.
Yeah, so maybe if we change the lead into each applicant shall have completed
Yes.
the following conditions, meet all of the following conditions. Okay. I think that was those were the 2 things that were on my mind.
Yeah, the only other item I wanted to highlight, in sort of a big picture sense, like I wouldn't want you to, I definitely don't want to, in the interest of doing something better, don't want to run into any issues where we would run into individuals losing authority to practice or diagnose or anything like that. It is interesting though, the last time that this regulation was modified prior to this current set of changes we're trying to put through was back in 2011. And one of the other professions is having a discussion about, some of the coursework type requirements were what was largely accepted as the standard 20 years ago, and that's what our regulations are based off of. But over the period of time, some of those topic areas have really changed, but we were still requiring some of the things that may not be outdated, but maybe need to be updated. So for yours, it's not 20 years ago; it's just 13 years ago, but that is still quite a bit of time. But if those are still the standards for the field, then perhaps nothing needs to be changed there. But that's just kind of one of those things where may be helpful to kind of look at our coursework requirements to see, are those still the standard? If they are, then maybe no change is necessary. But if there are things that have changed, I think there was Jardine maybe made a comment at the last meeting that some of the terminology is changing from marriage and family therapy to couples and family therapy. And I don't know if that's a change that's been widely accepted, but if there's things like that where our terminology is outdated, if there's things like that, we could also make those kind of adjustments too.
Chris, are the credit number semester credit hours for the different categories, are they still in line with COA accreditation?
Yeah, so well, meaning a COA accredited program would meet those criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I'm reading it. there's a requirement of 6 hours of theory and models, 6 hours of clinical treatment with individual couples and families, 3 hours of multicultural and underserved communities, 3 hours of research and evaluation, 3 hours of professional identity, ethics, and social responsibility, 3 hours of biopsychosocial, 3 hours of systemic relational assessment and mental health diagnosis. And then you have to demonstrate at no credit hours, a few other things like telehealth, community intersection, and dealing with contemporary issues. So I think so.
I well, I know we require two of those sections require 9 hours.
Actually,
The foundations,
the human development and family study courses
yeah, 3,
have
right?
9, and then
Yeah.
theoretical foundations, you have to have 9, and marital and family assessment and therapy courses, you have to have 9.
Mm.
So it sounds like they require 6, but then they require other special courses, specialized courses.
Yeah, which might equal 9 for those
Mhm.
categories total.
But just to make sure I'm tracking, would it be worthwhile to have a grid for us to look at to kind of see just what you're saying? I mean, it sounds like it's in line with me, but I'm just trying to follow along and make sure we're not seeing anything. And again, Jardine, I'm leaning on your input here too, because you do these reviews and you see what so maybe that's not necessary. But if we're looking
Well,
at,
I've never looked at the two side by side. This is the first time I've done that, but I think it would be worth having it looked at just to make sure that we're not over requiring things for applicants from non-accredited programs. To Heidi's point, we don't want to have more hurdles if they're not necessary.
I mean, this discussion is good, but sometimes that's helpful for me to see that in a black and white format. I don't know if that'd be helpful for anyone else, but it would be for me.
You want me to put a list together of, you want to see what the COA requirements are? Just would the title alone and the credit hours be sufficient, or do you want the descriptions of what that includes?
Jardine, how would you want to, because that would also be helpful.
Probably the description, because you maybe compare that to what's in the statute.
Okay.
That would be really helpful. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so it looks like we made a little bit of headway. We'll do some continued conversation on this for the next meeting. And we'll have some visuals to help guide that conversation. Is that good with everyone?
Okay.
Great. Okay, we'll go transition into our new business items and the possible survey of licensees. We talked about this last meeting about how BSRB has access to a survey tool. The social work group has done some surveys. So Dave, do you want to take that from here?
Sure. I went ahead and I sent out a copy of the survey report that we had put together based on the survey responses we got from all the social workers. We did go ahead and send that out to 8,288 individuals and got feedback back from about 2,700 and of those individuals, about almost 2,800. So a really good response rate, but that report on page 2 has a list of the 14 different questions that we asked those individuals, the social workers. And some of the questions we asked at the beginning were more questions to verify that we had good representation for the demographics of those groups, looking to see if they practiced in an urban or rural community primarily, looking to see what their highest level of license they had achieved. And then we kind of dove into the different subject matter. And the questions that they were asking about, one had to do with the multi-state compact that was before the legislature this spring, and their interest in maybe switching from their existing license to a multi-state license. One of the topics talked about feedback they were able to provide in terms of supervision and any issues that they had experienced related to receiving supervision or providing supervision, and also whether the switch towards mostly in-person supervision compared to remote supervision, if that had led to positive outcomes or negative outcomes or otherwise. There were some questions about their licensure examination, and there was also questions about continuing education, and there was a discussion about possibly lowering the number of hours every 2 years from 40 hours to 30 hours, and looking at all the different states for their profession. The majority of states actually have a requirement of closer to 30 hours. And so that's kind of one of the reasons they were considering decreasing the number of hours every 2 years from 40 to 30. And they were asking individuals that were licensed in the profession if they thought the decrease from 40 to 30 would hurt professionalism and practice. And so they got some input on that. And so those are some of the topics that they had asked questions about. We were able to do a survey for any of the advisory committees. If you want to put together some questions, and we can ask about topics that are relevant for your profession. What the social work advisory committee did is they had a conversation in the advisory committee about topics, and then we were able to design some draft questions. And then I brought those back to the committee to review, and they were able to approve those questions. And then we sent it out, put together the report, and then we've started the process of analyzing the data from that report now. So last meeting for your advisory committee, we started talking about a few possible questions. But what we could do today is talk about more possible topic areas, and then we could either put those questions together, or we could I could work on them in between this meeting and the next meeting.
Thanks, Dave. That was helpful too, because I was at first envisioning, a subcommittee that would meet and look at questions. And based on that, we do have some different level items, I think, just because we don't have the compact coming up, although it would be nice to understand the interest in marriage and family therapists on the compact issue too. I do like questions around geographic practice areas. I think that's interesting. And then also it would be interesting, based on some conversation we're going to have in a little bit, about what the sense is about a jurisprudence exam might also be of interest. What other comments, thoughts do the committee members have here?
I thought of some questions that I don't know, they seem what I thought was relevant. So one that I think would be particularly interesting, but I don't know if that's particularly interesting to the BSRB, is what percentage of like each MFT's caseload is actually systemic versus individual. I think that could be really interesting to know how many people are actually out there treating systems. I think also supervision is interesting to me, of if you are, because I think I talked about before how it's kind of unique. You can go straight into private practice right after graduating from school. And so how are people finding quality supervision versus just practicing and meeting the bare minimum? And are they using that supervision to work towards clinical licensure versus just maintaining a supervisor forever kind of thing? And then I also thought continuing ed could be interesting to think about based off of my own personal experience of just like, I probably every 2 years, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, do I have enough continuing ed? And then like trying to piece together the ways I can get continuing ed. So maybe being more like helping licensed people have more of a plan. I don't know. that one's kind of rough in my mind, but I think that that could be helpful for like the busy clinician of like, hey, this is some ways to think about all the different ways you can get your continuing ed instead of taking like a whole weekend to just cram it all in right before you have to renew your license.
Yeah, I mean, good thoughts. I think might be how we structure those questions could be challenging, but I think those are really good points. Thank you for bringing that up. I think at one point we did talk about the number of hours of continuing education. And if I remember correctly, our advisory group in total felt like the 40 hours was a good number to keep and wouldn't want to diminish that. But I think those other topics are of interest. My only counter to the systems question, again, and how we word it, because I think we are trained to treat individuals as systems. So I would want to wordsmith that in a way that considers, the number of people treating or the composition of the treatment. But yeah, other thoughts, great ideas.
I was curious about how can we ask questions around reporting? Like, do people know how to make a report? Have they ever made a report like what do you call it? The ethics violations reporting?
So you're talking about a
that?
complaint with the BSRB?
Yeah, do people know how to do that? Have they ever used that process? Yeah.
Are you looking at it from a perspective of just, do people have the knowledge about that? Or is there another perspective you're coming at with that question?
Mostly knowledge, I think. I also just think that there's something to the fact that you can't report anonymously. I think that just makes it, people are less likely to make reports because you cannot do it without people knowing that you did it. So I'm just curious if people are aware of the reporting process and if they've ever used it.
I was also thinking there were a lot of questions on the social work one about televideo versus in person, and I think there could be some value in finding the practice issues around that, or effectiveness, or is there a perception that one's better than the other or has barriers? So that might be some interesting questions too.
I like the questions that they have about people's perceptions of the impact of televideo on supervision.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's a question around, and I'd have to look at the numbers. Dave always has these available, but for people who have decided to not be on a clinical training plan and obtain clinical levels independent licensure, maybe the reasons around that, is that cost? Is that, technically you have to be under the direction of someone. So I have curiosity, probably because of my role on the complaint review committee, but I have curiosity around how people perceive under the direction and how frequency that contact is. Those are some questions that come out when I'm looking at things from the complaint side. Thanks, Dave. Let's see. Let's see here.
Can you make that bigger?
I know. It's like I'm gonna pull out the glasses here.
Yeah, let me see if I can make this bigger. Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, and I can even highlight these rows. That would help. So those are the two rows for LMFT and then clinical marriage and family therapist. And yeah, over the last about 9 years, the total number of marriage and family therapists has gone down maybe by about 30, just on a long-term basis. The clinical level has almost doubled from 444 to 830. But those 354 are not the same people necessarily. A lot of those people probably have moved to the clinical level or maybe have retired or let their license expire. But it does seem that we do have yeah, about 319 currently at the non-clinical level for marriage and family therapy.
And we can't tell how many of those are just working towards a clinical plan versus just lingering.
What I could probably do, I could probably run a report and just look at the license numbers for the people that are LMFTs. That'd probably be the easiest way to do that, and that would give me a time frame of how many of that group have had their license at that level for a long period of time compared to just the last 5 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And that should kind of tell me, are these people who decided to stay at that level or, potentially weren't able to pass at the higher level to move to the clinical license? And so I could probably at least bring back a total to let you know what percentage of the people at that have been at that level of license for more than 5 years. Yeah, I love numbers, and so I like looking at the totals over time, and I find some of these to be really interesting, especially because I know people sometimes maybe step away and then come back to a profession, but the overall totals you can kind of see growth in certain areas, whereas some of the other professions, I'm sure we've added new individuals, and some individuals have left or retired, and based on how many of these professions have been around for how many years, you may have a lot more retirement than you do in other professions where people maybe have entered those professions a little bit more recently. But yeah, I'd be happy to kind of look into sort of language on a question in terms of that, and then look to see some of the numbers to bring back for the next meeting too.
Okay, that's great. Any other thoughts on questions? And I would say feel free to email if you do have thoughts on questions in between meetings, so we can have that prepared for the next meeting too. If you right now you're not thinking of maybe what you'd want to see, that's certainly a viable option.
Yeah, and in terms of the email, just to make sure we don't run into any issues with public meetings, feel free to send any emails to me. And you're be happy we find a copy of Mary on those emails too, if you want to go ahead and copy her on as chair of the advisory committee. We just can't have interactive discussions with the majority of the members on these topics outside of a meeting. That's where we run into problems. But if you do have thoughts about additional questions or topic areas, feel free to send them to me. And if you want to copy Mary on that, that would be okay too.
Thanks for that clarification, Dave. Any other thoughts before we close this discussion? Great.
The
Go
only
ahead.
thought I have is, I don't know if it's relevant or not. I'd kind of like to see scope of practice, like how many are in private practice versus agency work. Because we do seem to have a lot of going into private practice, but many of us who work in agencies, we're having a hard time finding applicants. So
I
yeah,
agree.
I'm curious.
That'd be a good assessment, a good thing to assess. Yeah, and maybe some reasons, maybe some narrative reasons, or
Right.
we could create even some check boxes. But that's a great idea.
I'm just curious, what was the return rate on the surveys? Did you have a from that group?
Yeah, so we sent it out over a period of about 10 days, and most of the responses were on the first day of the survey, but we were able to use a survey tool, SurveyMonkey, and so we could send follow-ups to anyone who hadn't responded to the original survey request. So that avoided people being reminded to take it if they'd already done it. We were also able to do it specifically to those licensees so that we knew it was being controlled, so that people weren't just taking the link and putting it on a random message board somewhere, and then we had a lot of non-licensees responding. So we were able to kind of verify these were the actual licensees responding, and out of the 8,288 social workers, we got responses back from over 2,700 of them. So not quite 50%, but somewhere around, I think, 30% or 33% or something. which is a really good
Fantastic.
turnout. We did a survey about 3 years before, and we had about 1,000 responses. So much bigger response this time around.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to advisory committee membership.
Okay. And this topic is on the agenda because every 2 years, advisory committee terms officially end. Members are appointed to the advisory committee for a 2-year term, and you can be reappointed up to 3 more times for maximum service on the advisory committee for 8 years. And so we've been trying to do our part to make sure that we're timely when individuals are up for reappointment, to reach out to those individuals to see if they wish to be reappointed to an additional term, or if they wish to step off the advisory committee. And then if individuals are coming upon the end of their final term, then those individuals would need to come off the committee. And we go by state fiscal year. So this year we actually had, of the 7 non-board members on the advisory committee, 6 of those individuals were up for the end of a term, and 3 of the individuals were actually completing their 4th term on the advisory committee, so they weren't eligible to come back to the advisory committee. And that was Jardine, John Fleeker, and James Godby. And so those individuals, unfortunately, will have to come off the advisory committee at the end of June. But we had 3 other individual members of the advisory committee who were interested in seeking reappointment. And so basically the advisory committee policy states that there should be no fewer than 3 non-board members on the advisory committee, no more than 10. So with those 3 individuals coming off the advisory committee at the end of June, that would take the number of advisory committee members down to 4. So you definitely could have flexibility to add more members to the advisory committee. What we've done in the past generally is we've sent an email out to all licensees at both levels of license and said, you know, the advisory committee is looking for new members. Are you interested in being considered for this? If so, go ahead and give us a letter of interest and a resume or a CV, and then those will be reviewed by the members of the advisory committee, and then we'll follow up. Ultimately, the chair of the board has authority to appoint members to the advisory committee, but the advisory committee has discussions on applicants and makes recommendations, and then those get forwarded to the chair of the board for consideration and appointment. So if you would like, what I could do is send a message out to licensees after this meeting, letting them know, and then collect that information, provide it to you prior to the next meeting, and then you could make those recommendations at the June advisory committee meeting.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. Thank you, Dave. And it'll be sad to lose Jardine and John and Jim. Gosh, that doesn't seem like all their terms could be over yet.
Stand by my request that the advisory board look at allowing people to come back in the future after you take a term break.
I agree, Jardine.
AMST does that. You're allowed to, after you serve, you have to take a break of a term, but then you're allowed to be back on a ballot for a future position after you take a break. So
is that statutorily held, Dave?
It's not. The statute allows the boards to set up committees and subcommittees, but a lot of the framing of the advisory committee is just in policy for the board. So the board has kind of put together the advisory committee policy. So in terms of individuals coming back, that's just something the board would need to have a discussion on and clarify. Right now, it just says advisory committee members can serve 2-year terms and be reappointed for 3 additional terms. And it doesn't really say anything about people coming back after a certain length of time. So the board would probably need to have a discussion and make a decision on that.
Okay, let's put that on the board agenda, and we'll take that up, because I agree, Jardine, especially after people have so much experience with the committees and, you know, want to serve again. That's something we should definitely consider. Take that forward. Thank you.
By the way,
sorry.
Sorry, just in terms of the individuals for the next meeting, so the advisory committee policy does recommend staggering individual appointments to the advisory committee. So even though you would have space to add 6 people potentially at the next meeting, it might be good to just kind of see how many people submitted applications at that time and then make a decision when you go through the application.
Yeah, and we had, I think, had our previous discussion was sort of like adding 2 or 3 each time so that we wouldn't be in this position as time goes on. So great note for us.
And it does help, all things equal, if we can have an odd number of members in the advisory committee, that is helpful for quorum in case we ever have issues with that. But ultimately, it's about making sure that you make recommendations on who you think would be good candidates for the advisory committee.
Okay. Thank you, Dave.
So that means after the next meeting, then it would be our last meeting.
Yes, for the individuals coming off the advisory committee, the next meeting in June would be your last meeting on the advisory committee.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We will move on to the discussion of the jurisprudence examinations.
Okay. So at the last board meeting, the board had a discussion about jurisprudence examinations, and Kansas does not currently require jurisprudence examination for the 7 professions regulated by the BSRB. Basically, what a jurisprudence examination is focused on doing is it's trying to make sure that the licensees or individuals trying to become licensed have a good understanding of the laws and the requirements for individuals in that profession, and specifically the laws of that state as it would relate to licensure and practice. And so what some other states do for some of the professions is they make this a requirement of licensure. And so, for example, some of the states, let's say in Missouri, for some of the professions we regulate, have a jurisprudence examination. You have to take it, you have to pass it, and it's a requirement to become licensed. Kansas does not currently have one of those. We don't make it a condition of licensure. Some other states use it as a tool when they have individuals who are licensed in another state that are wanting to become licensed in their state. And I can tell you from a licensed professional opinion as an attorney, that would be, pretty intimidating to be able to practice in a lot of different states based on the differences in laws in all of those different states. So having a mechanism to verify that licensees understand the rules would be an important thing. And so some of the other members of the board have started to look at how many states require jurisprudence examinations and how they're implemented. I was working with Laura Shaughnessy recently, looking in the area of professional counseling to see how many states require it. And there's maybe about half that require jurisprudence or something similar to that. The way that they administer it, though, is different in different states. Some of the states have it set up to where they outsource it to a company. That company designs the jurisprudence examination, and essentially applicants have to pay that company a fee and then take a test and score high enough to pass the jurisprudence examination. Other states have partnered with groups that are able to set up some software and build that with a set of questions. And so for them, it is more of a learning tool. So you have to pass the jurisprudence examination, but essentially you pay a fee, you take the test, and then if you miss questions, they replace those other questions, and you have to go until you get enough of the questions correctly. In terms of what we could offer here in Kansas, I've done a fair amount of thinking about this to try to see, how could we accomplish the goal of a jurisprudence examination, and what would be maybe a helpful way to do this. And for the other states that have it set up where you have a requirement and then you have a fee, I'm not sure that would be the best approach in Kansas, at least at the moment. We do want to make sure that our licensees are knowledgeable about the laws of the state. And we have investigators here at the BSRB. We are charged to investigate complaints against practitioners. And sometimes there are bad actors, but sometimes there are individuals who just lack knowledge or misunderstand the rules and the requirements. So if fewer individuals are committing violations and fewer complaints are taking place, that would help us with efficiency to make sure that we can be more timely on some of the items that come through our office. It would be to everybody's advantage. But making it a requirement and charging a fee would be very complex right now. We don't want to do something that would be considered a barrier to licensure unless there's a really good reason for us to be putting something into place. Some barriers are very helpful. For example, there's a guardrail on the side of a cliff for a reason. You want people to make sure that they're not in danger. But we want to make sure that we have good requirements for licensure. So one of the ways that we were looking creatively at this topic was perhaps instead of charging a fee and making it a requirement, perhaps this is something where the BSRB could offer a service to licensees. And one thing that we kind of had some internal conversations about here is perhaps we could set this up where if we had some assistance in terms of writing some of the questions, we could offer it maybe quarterly, almost in a webinar type format. where we would go through the questions of the jurisprudence type exam. And I've been looking at software that we could potentially partner with companies so that licensees could log in, put their name, put their license number, and then they could essentially be taking this test live as we go through the questions in that webinar type format. And instead of charging a fee for this, we could offer it for individuals to sign up for and do optionally. And perhaps we could offer an hour of continuing education and ethics for individuals wishing to do this. I think this would accomplish a few different goals. It would make sure that we're helping people become knowledgeable and educated about those requirements. It would also avoid any kind of fee for the individuals. And for the people who are talking about needing continuing education hours, it would provide a free hour of CEs for those individuals as well. And we could do this potentially as sort of a test to see what the level of uptake would be for it. And then based on how many individuals just voluntarily chose to do it, we could see level of interest on expanding this in the future. But we wanted to kind of bring this to you today as a possible way that we could address the jurisprudence topic without making it a requirement. And then potentially we could look in the future to see maybe we could even incentivize how well people do on this live examination by saying if people score above a certain number or a certain percentage, perhaps there could be some extra incentives the BSRB could provide when they go to renew their license in the future. So kind of wanted to just toss this out as sort of an unconventional way of looking at jurisprudence exams. I haven't heard of any other states dealing with this topic this way, but I can see some real benefit to it. And we have tried to embrace sort of having an online component to a lot of the work that we do here at the BSRB office. And I think this is something that if we had some help setting up the questions, I think we could actually offer this too seamlessly. So I wanted to open this up for conversation and see what your thoughts were on the traditional jurisprudence examination approach, and then also maybe this alternate pathway.
I find it to be kind of a novel idea. I'll be honest with you. Here at Friends, we during our ethics class, I give them an exam that, of course, is I've created myself, which we call a jurisprudence exam over the code of conduct issues in the state of Kansas. We call it a jurisprudence exam because just knowing other states will do that and tell them you might go to a state where that will be required. Kansas currently requires you now to note that you're familiar, that you're responsible for those codes, but you're not tested on them. So if you were to do that in the incentivized kind of manner, or I would, as an educator, I would want to tap into the jurisprudence exam that you would have. It'd be an interesting learning thing. Plus, it's driving them toward the website or to the regulatory board anyway, which I would want them to do. So on the education side, I would do that. I understand why states do that. It does make some sense, to make sure that people are in the regulations, that they're familiar with that. On the other hand, I think by saying as a responsible adult, we are informing you and you're attesting that you have read and you're responsible for the code of conduct here. And then rather than making that a whole additional requirement on the regulatory board side to do, seems like a more effective way of going about doing that. So once again, I probably said two things in the opposite direction that I don't know how helpful. But as an educator, I would really like, if you were to develop that, I would want to tap into that if that were possible.
Yeah, and I've talked with a few of the advisory committees about this as a potential solution to this issue, and I have heard that from another educator. They thought there might be some interest in having their students do it, so I thought that would be great. We could open it up not just for licensees, but maybe for students as well if they wanted to take part in that. And maybe there's a way that they could report to us what school they were with, so that way we could communicate that back to their professors to let them know, we had this many people from your class voluntarily choose to do this, and we could even kind of communicate how well they did, I suppose. But
right, and
more about them taking it. So
and I would probably voluntold them as part of a class requirement. To take it.
I think from a licensed person's viewpoint, yeah, I don't think I would pass up a free ethics CE. And so I think that's a really cool idea, especially because it's Kansas specific, not just this random ethics. And then also it's already approved by you guys, so we don't have to worry, is it like BSRB approved? So I think that would probably be pretty successful.
I agree with what's been said. I'm definitely not in favor of adding another exam because I think the examination is really only testing their ability to memorize things up to that moment. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to hold all that information going forward. And yeah, I think standardized tests are notoriously biased anyway against certain groups of people. And so it's just another barrier that we don't need to add to getting licensed. So I really appreciate your creativity, David, and how to implement that. And I think it would be very enticing to current licensees. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. That there are certain groups that make things a requirement, and that can be a good motivator for sure. But I just think about, the ways that we've tried to make more information available just for the work the board and the advisory committees are doing, and just kind of putting things up on the YouTube channel and launching those and promoting those. At this point, our board meetings get, I think, about 80 views on average per board meeting, which I think is actually really great because, as far as I know, no one's required to watch our board meetings. So putting the information out there and just making it available, I think it's kind of neat that we live in a time right now where people can just prioritize being informed about things and choose to do this on their own. And the CE offering, that's just kind of a nice benefit. But I thought this might be a way to kind of tackle it without dealing with the issue of making the requirement and dealing with any kind of something that would be too tough for individuals to do right now, especially.
Well, I've been thinking about this multi-state compacts that we're talking about, because every state's got a different licensure level. Not everybody's got a clinical license. Not everybody has similar requirements. So it could be something that if they were going to be licensed also in Kansas, that could be something that, they could take that class. Or at least we would know that they would understand what are some of the basic laws or rules in Kansas. If Oklahoma and Kansas, Missouri, they're similar, but they're different too. So I'm just trying to figure all that out.
Dave, it sounds like there's a lot of good support from the advisory committee, and I know you and I talked about it too. I think it also, just echo, a creative way to drive people to look at our state professional standards, and just all around, I think, a solid idea and moves people towards that without making it a barrier. So sounds like we have a lot of approval for that idea.
We'll communicate this back to the board at the next board meeting. And then, ultimately, if the board is in favor of us going forward with a model like this, what I'll probably do is reach out to a few of you. One thing with the 7 professions is making different sets of questions, especially if we want to offer this quarterly, which I think would be a pretty good goal to do it with some frequency. I probably need a little bit of help with some of those questions specific to the different professions, but I'll let you know after the board has a conversation at the next board meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next item on our agenda was discussion for topics for 2024. So as we've shared, I know a lot, please feel free to send an email in between to Dave. You can copy myself if you have topic suggestions for this meeting. But if there are any right now that have been top of mind, we'd like to open that discussion. Well, like I said, if there aren't any things that are coming to mind right now, and we always cover these broad range things and bring to you things from the board, but please feel free if there's an issue you're seeing or you're hearing about, shoot an email. We'd be happy to get that on as a discussion item on the next agenda. Okay. Dave, anything from your end on that?
Nope. No, I think we're good.
Well, it looks like we have our next meeting scheduled for Friday, June 14th at 10. That should already be on your calendars. I looked ahead and Dave's already sent the invite. So that's already placed on your calendars for that time. And looks like we'll be saying goodbye to 3 committee members at that meeting. So hope that date works for everybody.
Thank you for your service.
I agree. Really appreciate that.
Okay, any other business? If not, it looks like we are ready to adjourn today.
Mary, I did email each of you a copy of the COA. I just copied, I was gonna try to pull, I just sent the whole manual and sent you to the page number.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hey, Jardine, before you pop off,
Mhm.
I sent you an email. It went to your personal email.
Yes, you did. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And
I
I
didn't
need
know
to
if you
I need
checked.
to connect you to someone else because I couldn't
Thank
answer
you.
the questions good enough. So yeah,
Perfect.
I will
Perfect.
do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all. I
Thank
appreciate your
you.
work. Have a great
Bye.
weekend.
You too.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.